And if you look, this is like how we're laying out our skill 4, okay? So in this, we're going to do, this is Bush 9/11. And we're starting with like the first half of Bush 9/11. All right, we already have our claim. Let me grab our stuff. We have our claim and everything already written, so we're going to go ahead and put it in there. I have some comments about our claims, looking at your Albright stuff, but I'm going to address that a little bit later this week. So our first claim was that empathetically addresses the morning events to show America's resilience, right? Is that ours? Okay. All right, so we're going to start. Most of y'all did a good job of like starting with my language, like in the first half. And this is like, I would say this is kind of like your history, like SAQ, right? Like this part right here would be kind of like your history SAQ. Bush empathetically addresses the morning's events to show America's resilience. All right, now we're going to look at our chunk, our first piece of evidence we've already chosen. Now here, and I know in our planning we didn't write it all out, here we want to write it all out. So I'm going to start at the bottom part of this because I'm going to leave the top part for us to like work on our embedding, right? So I'm going to write the whole quote, and that's that second sentence, right? The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries. Okay. So I have the whole piece, yeah? I'm just going to jot down, we labeled that, what? We labeled it a list.
Conjunction, semicolon, list.
Conjunction. It's a colon. So we labeled it the colon.
Oh, my bad.
Okay. So what we have to do here, and this first one's hard, I'll tell you, because the first piece of evidence we chose is like the second sentence. So when we get a little bit later in the passage, when we have something from like, let's say paragraph 4, it's easier to embed because you have more to work with. Right now we have one sentence, right? So what I do to find contextually is I put my finger where the evidence is, and everything before it I have to paraphrase. And it's hard for this one because it's just one sentence, right? But let's say we took like this sentence here, we would be able to paraphrase like the paragraph before, right? Leading up to this piece of evidence. So right now we have just one sentence. So read that sentence. We have to say more than he's talking about America, the events of the morning, because we've already said that in our claim. So turn to your partner. How are we going to paraphrase that first sentence Turn to your partner. You got like 30 seconds. How do we paraphrase that first sentence? Go. All right, let's try. Now listen, last class didn't get a lot from me because they just stared at me. I'm going to stare back at you. So, let's try this. Let's paraphrase what's happening. I know, good evening, move past that. What is he doing in that first paragraph? Or in that first sentence? Okay, so like our way of life. Okay, so that's what he's saying though. Our way of life, our freedom is under attack. How can we paraphrase that? Jonah?
The way we live and citizens of the USA have been altered due to terrorist attacks.
Okay, that works for me. What else, Carly?
I was going to say, like, Bush addressed the way what they were just saying.
Okay. Jonah, say it to me again. So, Bush, let's say Bush opens his address. What'd you say?
Like the way of life and citizens of America has been altered due to terrorist attacks.
Okay, so that Bush opens his address
To describe that our way of life has been. I'm sorry.
to describe that
Just one sentence.
our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom has come under attack. So we can't say like our way of life because we've already, like, that's what he said. Our way of life,
Ooh,
our
livelihood.
freedom. Okay, so to describe to describe how America's livelihood
We can say has been threatened.
we could say has changed, right? So, what happens is we can't just say Bush opens his address to describe or just by describing by. I wouldn't erase if I were you. I would mark out so that you can see what's changed, right? So if you erase, then you don't see how we change things. I like for you to see how we change things. So Bush opens his address by describing how America's livelihood has changed. The victims were in airplanes. Do those two things grammatically fit together? No. So what I have to do is I have to make that grammatically fit into that. So you have options. It's kind of like a puzzle piece. You have to add words above and you can take words below away. So you kind of have to keep moving them together and adding above, and maybe sometimes you can take away from like the beginning of this. Sometimes you don't need to. It depends on how you make them fit. So turn to your partner. How can I make those two pieces fit together grammatically? Talk to your partner. How do we make those two work?
When? When the victims were
Oh,
when the
oh, it's
victims
the paragraph. So,
change. How? How America's livelihood has changed. It is tough.
Can you change part of the evidence?
Good question. Like, what do you mean? Can you change part of the evidence?
Like change like the victims were, or like the victims like a different tense of word.
Yes, you can. You would. We'll talk about how you do that. Like, if you change a tense or I, and you need to change it to Bush, then in a square bracket you would just write what you replaced, which means you're changing the tense or the subject, the pronoun. Okay, so how? Any suggestions on how we can change, like add those two in? Bush opens his address by changed. Sarah?
Bush opens his address by describing how victims, his secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms, dads, friends, and neighbors' livelihood has changed.
I don't know if I'd add the end part because they're dead, so their livelihood. Sorry, too soon.
To be fair,
Like they're dead, so their livelihood has obviously changed because they have no livelihood left.
Relations has changed.
Okay, so you could say Bush opens his address by describing the victims were. You could do that. How else did y'all change it? This is where you want to talk to me because after this I just move forward. Sullivan, try it.
Like, it describes America's livelihood has changed because the victims' families were, like, you can't change the quote, can you? But you can add, victims' families were changed.
By describing how America's livelihood has changed. Do we not like this livelihood?
maybe. We should probably change that.
Okay, so if you want to change this livelihood, change that to make this fit. Bush opens his address by describing how what's happened. Like, what is he describing? That America.
Well, the people he's describing are different relationships.
Nope, we're not. That's summary. I'm trying to get into that first like that first sentence. Carly.
Could you say that Bush opens his address by describing the victims who were in airplanes, and then... Oh, wait, but you're summarizing the first sentence.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
I'm trying to embed something from that first sentence to move us into, because he doesn't just go, the victims. Like, he opens it somehow. Colin?
I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Do it.
Bush opens his address by describing how American livelihood has changed. And then the secretary, businessmen, all that whole list, and the actual big list.
But you still are just going, has changed the secretaries. So it's still not
Okay.
embedded.
Are we applying?
Carly? Logan, go ahead. Let me try Logan.
So can I change livelihood has changed to like values and people have been attacked, or
Opens his address by describing how America's what?
values and people have been attacked?
Ooh, how America's values and people have been attacked. Now, how do I get into the victims? I like that change. Bush opens his address by describing how America's values and people have been attacked. As the victims were. That would work. Could you say what?
Have fallen victim to, or have fallen victim in, like, airplanes.
You could. Yeah. Like, say that again. What? It was a simple word. What did we say?
As.
Bush opens his address by describing how America's values and people have been attacked as the victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women. That works.
Perfect. Go team.
So now that grammatically that fits. Notice that how this will get easier. This like embedding will get easier the more you do it. It blows my mind that y'all have never done this before. So, because even in literature, you still paraphrase that way, right? Like you still embed text contextually, or else it doesn't make sense when you talk about like Caesar was stabbed and he said like, what happened before that led up to Caesar being stabbed? Like you have to embed that. Okay, so now let's look at our analysis questions. These are all about our labels. Okay, so these are going to be how questions, why questions. It could also be like a what question, as long as it's not like, what does this mean? Because I don't need you to tell me what a piece of evidence means. Right? I need you to talk to me about the value of it being said in that way. So, let's ask a question. Let me show you an example of one, okay? So, if I'm looking at the list, I'm going to say, why is the list of victims in that order? What value does that bring? What value or understanding does that create? All right, talk to your partner. Ask. That will lead us into analysis, not summary. I don't need you to tell me that those are all the victims that died. Duh. So, turn to your partner, see if you can ask another question about those things.
That's a little bit less than the reasoning because they are inside.
Right. And that can be the answer to the question. This is a good question.
I just feel like there's
I'm still going to wait. While you
It's in this order because it's just kind of forgot to talk about.
say, why does he start off with this? Why does he start with this?
It describes the word and not just the
All right, what other questions can I ask? What questions can I ask, Carly?
So this goes back to and like why those people specifically. Is that unique?
Say that again.
How did those people specifically affect the country when they passed away?
So I need to go back to the list. So how does this list, so I see where you're going, create empathy? Okay, that would work. What other questions?
Like, why does he begin with this list?
One first paragraph.
Okay, so why does he open? I like that. Okay. Look at y'all already answering. Why is the list in victims in that order? You're going to answer. That's the answer, yeah. What other questions? What did we label? The ands, the conjunction. So what is the purpose of a conjunction? What does it do?
Combines two ideas.
It combines things. You can ask about the conjunctions.
Why are all these things put into one? Why are all these ideas combined?
Okay,
Is there
so
a better way to say it?
Why do the conjunctions, maybe how? How do the conjunctions combine these groups of people? I think that works. Any other questions that we can think of? All right. So now, right now, the questions are important because they'll move you away from summary. Once you get into this, maybe about a month from now, the questions will become for you as you're writing, because, and what I'm hoping that in about a month you'll be able to hear yourself when you're giving me just summary and not talking about purpose of the language, right? So let's move into the does and the connection. How does this evidence said in this way help this speaker move their audience? So now we need to look at, like, what's the list of victims? So why are the list of victims in that order? Colin, you said chronologically. What do you mean chronologically?
I was thinking like the fact like secretary, businessmen, women, they were people who died, military, their war, people who were helping, and moms and dads, and the main people who were affected by that.
Okay. Kind of, yes.
Who was affected first and then later on?
Okay. Oh, okay. So that's kind of like what I think he's saying, right? Like the idea of like,
Yeah, that's it.
it isn't what you just. It's a form of what you said, but a little bit more clear. So let's go with that. So the idea that it was like the order in which I want to say like the grief impacted, like, but
Like a ripple effect.
but it doesn't. The businessmen and women, the secretary and dads, like the businessmen and women were literally the first to die, right? But then you go to the moms and dads who are the ones that were impacted. There's something chronological in there that I think is more important than like who felt the impact. Impact is not the right word to use in this.
I think ending it off with like the mom and dad, friends and neighbors kind of sets like an empathetic drive to change the perspective of other people who also haven't been like directly affected by
Okay. I'm talking about like chronologically something. Carly.
Okay, if we're talking about like the grievance, so the people who are grieving them specifically, we'll think of them first as businessmen and women, and then
Okay, but why? How many planes hit buildings that day or were taken down?
3. Well, taken down. 3 hit buildings. 4 were taken, 3 hit
4 total were used, right? The first 2 hit what?
towers.
The Twin Towers. Who were in the Twin Towers? Ooh, chronologically, the 3rd plane hit what?
Pentagon.
And who was in the Pentagon?
Military and federal.
Oh my God, I just heard light bulbs go off. And then the 3rd down in the middle of like in Pennsylvania, because who was aboard?
Moms and dads, friends and neighbors.
Okay. So,
Very well written.
the list mimics the order of the attack because the first 2 planes hit the Twin Towers, where secretaries, I'm going to get you to not do this like double quoting later, but I'm not worried about it now. Businessmen and women were working the third plane, hit the pentagon, where military and federal workers were, comma, and the final plane was taken down over Pennsylvania and had okay. All right. So why is the list of victims in that order? Okay, I think we can go even more into that. So y'all talked about, like, it's the order that we recognize grief, but, like, let's look at the idea of, like, the conjunctions, like, how is it creating these groups? The order of these groups go from, like, what to what? Yep.
Kind of to connect that empathy, I would say that because before them being business women and women, they're friends, moms and dads, like before that.
Okay. Yeah, so it, like, the friends and neighbors, moms and dads is more what? It does create empathy because why? It's a closer connection. It's a closer relationship, right? So, but we have to talk about how we move there. So in the beginning, the secretaries, businessmen and women, and military and federal workers, if this end list is very personal, what is that beginning list? It's what?
I don't know them as well, more sympathetic as empathetic.
Okay.
It's just like a label, not a label, but like just the general.
So it's more broad. It's more broad because would you rather be defined as a secretary or as a mom? Don't answer stupid questions here. I mean, like, when I go home, like, when I'm out there, am I a teacher or am I a mom? Which one is more valuable to me? Mom, right? So if you look at, like, the conjunctions, create labels for groups that move from their job to a more familiar, like, relationship, right? This creates empathy. Why?
It's a closer connection.
Because what?
It's a closer connection.
But why?
Because everybody's got a mom, not everyone has a secretary.
Yeah, because we can all relate to, like, a family connection.
We can't relate to a secretary.
But we don't all have a connection to those jobs. Now, were those secretaries also mothers? Yeah, I mean, like, they could have been, right? Or they had a mother, right? Like, so you can see, like, that reaction. Okay, that works for me. So we talked about how does this list create empathy, okay? Let's go back to, Finn, what you were saying about like why is this so early? Why do you think like this piece of evidence is so valuable so early? I like that idea.
I think it's just setting up the tone as, kind of like getting to the point.
Yeah, that doesn't say anything. Setting up the tone, getting to the point says nothing. Why so early? Why the second sentence? You know what? We might be able to do that in the second part, and I'll show you, because in order for us to show resilience, we have to show what we overcame, right, in order to show resilience. So our next chunk may show that. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so now we have to tie it to the rhetorical situation, one component. What component of the rhetorical situation do you think this most closely connects to? Audience. Okay. We can't say, look, this applies to the audience of people who lost family members because there's the family members that they lost. That means nothing. So let's go beyond that group. What's something else that we can do? Connect it to in the audience. What other audience? Oh, get it, Logan. Thank you. What's another audience that we can connect it to? Look at what we wrote down. You can't say military workers, federal workers, or first responders because they are those military and federal workers. They already know what they're doing. Carly? Okay. Well, that's too obvious.
The Taliban or U.S. allies.
Okay. So let's look at the Taliban or like the terrorists. Like early on, does that piece of evidence help us to get the Taliban or the terrorists to understand something? All it shows is they did what they were supposed to do. That doesn't help his, reaffirming the country's strength. But if we look at the allies, how does this list impact our allies?
Oh, it garners sympathy from them as well.
Why? We can't just say something does something.
We just listed a reason for why it garners sympathy.
But why does it apply to our allies? Okay, so this list allows our allies to understand that they, too, can be greatly affected. And it will help the U.S. And it will help, and it helps to show our need for their support. So that, my friends, is half a paragraph. So listen to what we have. In the first half, Bush empathetically addresses the morning's events to show America's resilience. Bush opens his address by describing how America's values and people have been attacked as the victims were in airplanes or in their offices, blah, 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 blah. The list mimics, and I don't like the idea of the list, but we can change that later. The list mimics the order of the attacks because the first two planes hit the Twin Towers where secretaries, businessmen, and women were working. The third plane hit the Pentagon where military and federal workers were, and the final plane was taken down over Pennsylvania and had moms and dads, friends, and neighbors aboard. The conjunctions create labels for groups that move from their job to a more familiar relation to a family connection, but we don't all have a connection to those jobs. This list allows our allies to understand that they too can be greatly affected, and it will help show our need for their support. That's half of a paragraph. On the back is chunk 2. And what you notice on the back is chunk 2, and you notice a bow tie. The bow tie will be, I think, when we move into Finn, like why that evidence is there, right? In the beginning, Finn. In the beginning, why that evidence in the beginning, and then why that metaphor in the second. Like we have to connect those two things together to know how it relates to our claim, right? All right, tomorrow I'm going to put you in new groups. You're going to be in new groups. Write this number down. We're numbering 1 through 6. Write this number down on your piece of paper. Say it out loud.
1, 2, 3.
1.
5, 6, 7, 2,
3.
5, 6.
Write that number down. You are going to be in that group tomorrow. My first 6 people that numbered off, you will get from me today. I'm going to share a document with you. Tomorrow, you will